Did you know that millions of metric tons of plastic end up in our oceans every year? Well, specifically, PR Newswire in 2015 reported that 8 million metric tons of plastic leak into the world's oceans every year. Now, this is a lot of plastic. So, today, I'm here to convince you to reduce your plastic waste production. I'll go over the problems regarding our plastic waste problem. Then I'll move on to the causes of why plastic waste keeps on building up. And lastly, I'll go over the solutions we could take to reduce plastic waste that's going into our oceans and landfills, and land in general. So, starting with the problems, I'll go over how plastic waste is affecting marine life and how plastic waste also affects our own bodies and our health. So, starting with a fact, Frontier Marine Science in 2018 reported that microplastics ingested by marine life increase likelihood of pathogens in those marine life. Well, when plastic enters the water as microplastics, these fish ingest these plastics, and in turn, bigger fish ingest that fish while also ingesting the plastic that is ingested by that fish. So this builds up a cascade effect where fish eat plastic and bigger fish eat more plastic as time goes on, making very toxic fish. So while this is obviously very bad for the marine life, as many of the plastics that are ingested reduce fertility and overall health of marine life, this also affects our health in general. So, moving on to how plastics affects our health, many people rely on fish as a diet. So, in the Daily Beast in 2018 reported that microplastic in drinking water can affect endocrine dysfunctions. So, while this says that drinking water, specifically drinking water, will affect endocrine functions, plastic in the drinking water, this also covers plastics as a whole. So, when I said earlier that endocrine functions in fish are affected, it also affects our bodies too. And so when we consume fish that have consumed microplastics, we will also consume that, as well as if it's in drinking water and so on. And so this is obviously very bad. We don't want endocrine dysfunction, which is the hormone functions of our body, and this can affect obviously our fertility as well, and our overall functions of the body and growth in general. So this is a very long-term problem. Moving on to the causes, I'll be talking about the dumping of plastic waste in our ocean by our governments, and also the irresponsible use of plastics in everyday households. So, starting with dumping of waste. In 2015, Environmental Research Letters estimated about 50 trillion particles of plastic in the ocean. This is done by dumping landfills into the ocean by governments, and so obviously this dumping dumps millions of particles of plastic into the ocean, and this is how major amounts of plastic ends up in our ocean. But it's not entirely the government's fault. It's also a major part by everyday people like us. Moving on to irresponsible use of plastics. The Globe and Mail in 2019 reported that 90% of single-use plastics end up in the ocean. These single-use plastics are bottles and single-use paper plates, plastic plates, styrofoam plates, those plastic containers that we use for some certain products. That is what this is talking about. So a lot of people just trash this plastic waste, and it ends up going to landfills, which, when I mentioned earlier, this landfill dumps that trash into the ocean. So now that I covered the problems and causes, I move on to the solutions. I'll cover two solutions: recycling more plastic and establishing a tax on plastic products. First, I'll cover the more smaller scale, people-focused solution, which is recycling. So, the Edmonton Journal in 1991 reported that home recycling of plastics will reduce plastic waste volume by 20 to 1. The simple reusing of plastic waste will reduce our plastics by a lot. This also, moving on to establishing a tax on plastic waste. In 2018, the Daily Telegraph reported that plastic tax in UK encourages businesses to switch to environmentally friendly alternatives. Basically, what this means is that if we establish a plastic tax, businesses will be encouraged to switch to alternative, more environmentally friendly sources for these plastic, and it'll overall lower the plastic waste produced. So, when I mentioned earlier that major plastic was being dumped into the ocean, well, slowly, many governments around the globe have established a plastic tax and are now reducing plastic waste overall. So now that I covered the problems regarding plastic waste and the causes and the reasons why plastic waste is building up and the solutions we could take to reduce plastic waste, I hope that I convince you to reduce your plastic waste. Thank you.